Ryan, welcome. We're going to do something different today. We've got Stuart Roy Clarke with us today, Mr. Holmes of Football. He is an author and photographer, and I've no doubt people across football will have seen his work. Um, Stuart, welcome. And how have you been?
Nice to speak to you on FC Business. I've been good actually. I have, despite lockdown, losing the thing that we love, and never could have imagined it. Close season comes. Had we lived in those times, that the two great wars, interrupted football. But there's been no interruption of football, and certainly not losing its crowds in all of its history, apart from those wars. So this is unprecedented grounds for us, Aaron. What were we going to do, and not knowing how long it's lasting. And the podcast is I'm speaking to you now, and at this very time, football is just making a tentative return, but without the crowds. I've been good. I haven't photographed a single match. There's been no matches. I've taken one football photo in 3 months, but I've been thinking about what I'm doing. And personally, it's been a time of great heartbreak. But finally, I've found the girl I love, great story. So that perhaps wouldn't have happened if football hadn't had a break, because I've been married to the homes of football for 30 years.
Yeah. It is quite a situation. And obviously for a person like yourself, a photographer, your whole business is focused around taking pictures of football, and particularly the fans. And we are going to be moving into a new world where there's going to be, we've got football back in a kind of way, but there are no fans, and fans make football. We all know that, and we've talked about that for a long time. And so it's just such a strange, it's going to be a strange feeling going forward. But today,
absolutely, football fans do make it. They make the home advantage. This is proven in Germany. We've had a month of the Bundesliga, and the results are that at least as many teams have won away from home. I'm just sure that wouldn't happen if you're being goaded by the home crowd to just, even if you're playing badly, to just keep going to the final whistle, give it that bit extra. We've only had a couple of games here in England on its return without the crowd, so it's a bit unproven. Fans make the games. They make British football peculiarly fascinating. I think the world of football, we love both. We love going to World Cups and things, but you and I and many others are obsessed with what we've inherited over the course of 120 years, particularly this Football League, Premier League, all the clubs. And, I set out to do something 30 years ago, which was this portrait of all of them, big and small, everywhere, throughout the UK, above all England and also Scotland. And to just wrap this little bit up about, what does a photographer or me do when there's no games or no crowds? I dream of it. I could go now to some games, and one says, possibly what's the point without the crowds? I'm waiting on its return. I'm going to do some grand tour of all the clubs very soon, some of which are going to appear in our chart here.
Yeah. So today, the whole point of this call and this video is you're gonna present to us your top 10 football clubs from the UK. Can you tell us a little bit about this? You've been doing this on LinkedIn for the last few weeks. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're going to do and how the list was compiled?
Very well, I will. For 30 years, I've done the homes of football, exhibitions and books. I had a museum for many years that people visited, including yourself, Aaron. I think I met you there, in the Lake District, which was like, in the Lake District, why would you have a football gallery there? Typically me. I put it there, and it turned out to be popular. And it presented all the clubs, etc., etc. I think what I've done over the years has gone down well. People in football like it, and a lot of punters, without me sort of marketing it too much. They find it, they like it. I think more recently, and partly because of my age, sitting on 30 years worth of work that covers that whole period, in fact, before the Premier League even came along, I started thinking, I'm not going to get all pretentious and pretend I'm, a philosopher or an academic. But perhaps it isn't just entertainment that I presented. It's a social document with lots of stories. And this chart that we're now going to present, this top 10 live, if you like, as a podcast it isn't my favorite clubs. I love them all, but it is about 3 months worth. If I'd known COVID was happening, perhaps I would have done this 3 months worth of work during COVID, but typical me, I did it during the winter whilst my daughter was doing her homework. Every evening I spent hours and hours, weeks and then months, putting together something that I'd never seen before, not truly, which was a chart of all 133 clubs that had ever graced the English League. I think you said UK, as we often do. This chart is the English clubs. So there's no Celtic or Rangers in this, etc. And what I wanted to do was create the all-time football league going back to 1888. And it was all to do with what position did you finish each season. I won't go into the exact techniques of it, partly because I'm guarding it, preserving, all that work I've done. I can tell you this is authoritative. I haven't fiddled any. I haven't thought, I prefer them to them. I'll do that. In the end, I've just given you a chart. I haven't given out the exact points, if you like, that each tallied. But we're going to start at number 10 when, I've got another list here that gives the top 50. And I'll just say there's a few surprises, Aaron. I'll just test you. Where would you guess somebody like Brighton might be in the top 133 clubs? If you put all the league tables together from ever, where do you think they would be roughly? I'm not going to say, oh, no, you're wrong by one, roughly.
Which team did you say there? Sorry.
Brighton. Let's say Brighton.
Oh, at risk of getting shut down by Brighton fans, I would say 30.
A lot lower, 52. Bournemouth are also outside the top 50. Watford, who are only just in it, and Bury are above all those three clubs. Now, we know, as does the public, the plight of Bury, a club that is seemingly finished. And in this chart, it would take a few more years because it's 100 and something years worth. They'll gradually drop down. I'm not going to raise them because they're there. They're at number, I'm just looking, Bury number 43, just above Luton. So it's not a chart of huge surprises, but there are some. And, as a generalization, before we dip into who is number 10, number 1, etc., I think there's a bit of a change sometimes after the Second World War. You could sometimes say this happened roughly up to that point. And then a club like Tottenham, really, they were 27 or something, by the end of the Second World War. Yeah. After the Second World War, they're a club that they're going to feature in this top 10.
Okay. Well,
you're itching for number 10. I know you are, because you know what it is, and it's going to surprise a lot of people. This number 10. I'm
a bit disappointed they're not higher than number 10. But I'll take a top 10 place right now, though.
Don't spoil it, because you're wanting them to be above number 7, which we'll come to. Let's start now. The reason that Sunderland are number 10. But what will surprise many even more than that, where they go number 10, I mean, at the moment, if we kind of think of it like this, they're number 20, that's the Premier League, all the league below. They're like about 50, aren't they? Number 50 or something in terms of their current position. Over all of football's history, I won't keep saying this about every entry, I'm just making this point now. This is an average. They are number 10. And up until, I've got it here, in 1939, which you were jumping up and down at the thought of this, in 1939, they were number 1. Yeah. Sunderland were football history's top club from the first 60 years or so. Even as recently as 1969, this is a period kind of where you and I were coming into, recognizing all these clubs in our youth. They were number 3. It's only this troublesome last 2 or 3 decades that has dragged them down gradually to number 10. And, they could drop further, but you won't find, if I did this chart in a year's time, they won't have changed position hardly at all. They're probably still 10. if they carried on in this position they're in now, Aaron, for, which would break your heart and probably put the club in jeopardy. If they stayed in the third tier for another decade, I'm guessing they would be about number 15 or 20. Okay, so the reason why Sunderland are number 10 is for those very, exceptional first few decades, and then a pretty consistent achievement thereafter. And there's this kind of joke that goes around is, how can they be so well supported, have a ground that holds 50,000, often gets 30,000 plus just this last season in the third tier, when they've never won anything except for the FA Cup in 1970. Well, they did win quite a few titles in the early days. They are truly, they're not even a sleeping giant. They're a giant that should be higher. And wrapping up my little thing about Sunderland is a tragedy, I think. I'm sorry to the 100 people who live where the ground was at Roker Park. It was famed for the Roker Roar. It was an amazing ground for atmosphere. But, all that's there now is the clock stand drive or midfield drive or something like a few names that sort of say, oh, yes, there was a football club here, and there might be some little thing on the centre spot. But, this was a ground, and I'll come to this point once more in the top 10 because I want to bang on the table about it. Is that how we should remember a club or a ground that has served us incredibly, it's a religion, football, to a point. It's certainly a place of worship. So millions of people have been to see Sunderland football matches in the course of the 100 so years that are at Roker Park. And all it ends up is a bit of a housing estate. And some clubs, it's worse. It's a car park. Number 9 is Chelsea. They're a club that's been actually quite consistent over the course of all of football's history, particularly in the 20th century, hitting a height really in the 1970s with a memorable team, cup final matches against Leeds, etc. Then things went a bit sour. The club was up for sale for £1 when Ken Bates stepped in. A formidable character. My own Chelsea memories are coloured by two big things. There's some skirmishes with Ken, which I'll come to, but before that, in the 60s, to this place where I am at my mum's, we used to have all these kids come from London. And they came for the summer holidays because they couldn't afford to go to the countryside themselves from London. Anyway, the thing that every single time, it was obviously they were all from that area of London, Stamford Bridge. They didn't say much, but they seemed to be very proud about their football club. So I'm saying 60s into the 70s, not surprising to a point. So I started, although I was a Watford fan, they're not in our top 10, so I'll just talk freely about them. All my family is Watford through and through. I was a Watford fan, but I started thinking Chelsea. So I started wearing a Chelsea bobble hat in bed and socks and things. And I think it was just in honour of these kids that came and talked so warmly about Chelsea. On the flip side, in a way, Ken Bates saved the club. He moved them on. I've got some respect for Ken, but he was a formidable opponent and he liked to rub you up the wrong way. I rang up and said, Stuart Clarke, yeah, who's that? Well, actually, secretary was trying to speak to me, okay, so you want to go on the roof? You need to take a photo for the Football Trust of the ground and the improvements. Yes, please, Teresa. It's a bit tricky. And then next to know, Ken has grabbed the phone off her because he liked doing this. There was probably an audience of people to show off to. And he tried to put me in my place as a mere photographer, swearing at me, whatever. And I just kind of basically went like this. And I thought, well, if I get to go on the roof, I'll be pleased. He just gave me the hairdryer treatment. And that's the way he was, in turning Chelsea around. He was just a formidable opponent, as rude as he liked to anybody who he thought he could be. But we arrive, decades later with a Russian who loves the club, taking over that club and moving it on again. And like them or loathe them, Chelsea are here to stay. Number 8, we go across London to Tottenham Hotspur, who in my intro, when I was chatting to Aaron, I said just a brief kind of thing about this top 10 is that there isn't really any Johnny come latelys that can just come zooming up this chart because it is over 120 years. Tottenham really have gathered pace, and this shows no sign of stopping. I mean, they're at number 9 now. In a decade, will they be in the top 5 of this chart? They could be. In building this amazing stadium and doing it on the spot of the old one, just turning it around, White Hart Lane becomes, the new Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. It really is an incredible stadium. And to do it in London, where there's such a premium of space, and in Tottenham, where it's a bit of a troubled area, they could have said, let's do it a couple of miles on the edge, near the M25 or something. It's an amazing stadium, an amazing achievement. Once again, somebody in charge, not everyone's friend. It's always going to be like this. Chief execs, chairman, and particularly owners can rub you up the wrong way. But Tottenham are where they are. They're in a way a top 5 club, I would say, in the year 2020. But in all of football's history, they're number 8.
Yeah, and in terms of the new stadium, how does that compare to the old White Hart Lane?
Well, this is an interesting thing, Aaron. We could talk for ages about old clubs, new clubs. People always ask me, generally with the Premier League and the changing to all-seater, what are the changes? That's also a kind of discussion on the back of this one. I always say that me personally find something almost interesting at every club and at every ground. I think the new grounds have to be full, and this is weird about the lockdown. They're absolutely empty. It's not even like they're half full or 2/3 full like Stadium of Light. They are empty. And people are trying to dress them up with flags and, cardboard cutouts in the seats and things. But I think it's an amazing stadium, but it has to sell out every week, because the moment it doesn't, you just start noticing gaps and it looks like they're not so loved. The old White Hart Lane had this incredible atmosphere, as did probably, I'll say this about everybody, probably in different ways. One of the things I really remember there, and I don't know if you experienced this, is the way that the home crowd would goad each other. There's 2 sides. It would absolutely go. And I started thinking, I was quite confused. I think the very first time I went, I thought, some away fans got in that section. Why are they going on about, the shelf, and the shelf going on about the south stand, whatever it was? And it was almost edgy, like they were going to have a fight, but it was just winding each other up. I think 1 or 2 clubs do this. Tottenham probably do it as much as anybody. So even without any away fans, they created an incredible atmosphere. I think the new stadium, that isn't quite happening. People are just there gawping at the magnificence. And there's this huge weight of expectation. That is a ground now built for a top 5, top 1 club of England, So you can't just be content with looking at the old White Hart Lane. Oh, yeah, that was, that quirky old corner over there. That's where my granddad used to stand. That's all gone. New era.
Okay, let's move on now. Who is at number 7?
You can't cut out number 7. You just said, let's go to number 6. Number 7 is...
I would like to cut this one out, or at least switch to number 10.
Number 7 is Newcastle United. In some ways, they've been less spectacular. I'm going to have to compare them with Sunderland to start off with. You need that in the same breath. In many ways, Sunderland hit higher peaks than Newcastle did, certainly during those first few decades, where they were kind of, Sunderland, I'm talking about, almost the team of the land. But Newcastle have never been far away. People might say, oh, I remember them in the 2nd tier. Yes. And, even this season, next season, you wouldn't say their Premiership place is assured. We've just been talking about Tottenham. They aren't going to get relegated anytime soon, nor Chelsea. But Newcastle, could happen. And at the moment, there's grey issues about ownership. They've had a spectacularly unpopular chairman. You sometimes think you've seen the most unpopular chairman owner ever. And Mike Ashley, he might, the sort of man he is, he probably wouldn't mind having a medal or certificate saying like number 1 at something. But people haven't really taken to him. You could say without him, who knows? And at the minute, they could go abroad in terms of their ownership, and that's different again. But we're not going on too much about what's happening in 2020. What I'm looking at is over the last 30 years, when I've photographed all these clubs, it went from a ground of quite modest surrounds of, once again, a hodgepodge of stands that had been built up over the decades. There's an Archibald Leach, stand in there, which is always a classic touch. He was the great designer of football stadiums in the early part of the 20th century. Everton, Sunderland and places set them on their way. And that's a kind of quality mark. But with Sir John Hall, he came along and, he wasn't too nostalgic for that. He wanted to see the Toon, a club from his area, up there with the mightiest. And so there was this rapid period of expansion, through the first 5 years of the 90s, where there was just stands getting bigger and bigger. And it is truly a cathedral. Sorry, Aaron, I have to say, it's truly a cathedral, bang in the centre of a city. You couldn't get more central than that. So the church or official cathedral is so modest. I'm talking actually religious building is modest by comparison to this incredible football thing in the centre of the city.
Yeah, it does pain me to say, but from our offices we can see St James's Park, and it does sit right over the city. It is the focal point of that whole city. But we'll move on. Okay.
Right, we'll move on. Okay.
Okay, so we'll move on.
We're looking for number 6. Oh, it's a club that no one's ever heard of. Actually, Manchester City, number 6. Some people say they are Johnny-come-latelys, aren't they? This is the younger generation who think that they're a new invention, that they only came to being with some money from, the Middle East, and that they were this kind of rubbishy club, a bit like Stockport, in relation to Manchester United, just down the road. You and I, and certainly my dad's era, no, they remember them for Bert Troutman, great players, great teams, great managers. Sometimes some of those characters have played for both Manchester clubs. There was a period where Manchester United were bombed out of Old Trafford during the Second World War, and they had to go and play at Main Road. So the clubs are sort of intertwined, and at the moment, they're pretty much alongside each other. But, the period I'm fondest of is actually not really where they are now, although I have to say, Aaron, the best match I've ever been to, the most dramatic, was the one where they won the championship for not the first time, but for the first time in a long time. And I won't go into it, but the Aguero one, last minute, etc., last kick of the match almost. I always think that can't be better as an experience. People resent that a bit now, because I think at the time they hadn't done it for what felt like a lifetime, and then they did. And now they're doing it every season. They're up there. So people it's lessened it a bit. But I remember I had access all areas that day. The drama was unbeatable. But the point I was about to make was, but for that match, I would say Main Road, although they were down in the 3rd tier sometimes during the 90s, 2000s, at Main Road, it had 4 different stands, and they reflected all the eras of its life, where they built that one, and then they built that one. And, there was a gallows humour, which is gone now. Gallows humour, for you youngsters who don't understand this, it means like, we're going to die, or something terrible is going to happen to us, but we'll make fun of it. It means, gallows humour, have a rope round your neck. And that's what Manchester City's character had become. It was the lesser of 2 clubs. We're always going to be the bridesmaid, they probably thought, but at least we've got the humour and the wit that Manchester United, even Liverpool, their rivals, blah, 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 perhaps haven't got. I think that's gone now, because how can you have that when you're just top 2 every season?
Yeah. And how do you feel about the changes that have been, and especially not so much Man City, but the teams that you've just talked about? A lot of them have gone through changes. They've moved from these old grounds that were built up over decades, and some of them have moved to new stadiums, like Manchester City. Sunderland's one of them. Newcastle have still got their old city, their old ground. Chelsea have still got Stamford Bridge. How do you feel there's the dynamics changed within the crowds?
Yeah, I think that it's kind of charming, and that's just a very fuzzy word. If a club can sort of stay roughly where they were, Sunderland haven't moved more than a stone's throw, really, from Roker Park. Tottenham, incredibly, just built on the same spot and turned it round, a bit like Wembley. I won't go through the whole list. We just mentioned all the other clubs. I kind of like that because I do understand why you as a marketing man, new owner, even sometimes the fans want to move the club on and don't just want to hark back to some year of the past, however good or bad it was. But I do think there's that continuity that makes British football special. You know, it goes back 7 or 8 generations, and sometimes people's families have been associated with the club that entire time. And there's a slight, jarring if you move away. MK Dons was a spectacular kind of strange move, perhaps leave that one aside. But actually, of the clubs that have stayed put, it's a bit controversial me saying this, there's not a club in this top 10, but Sheffield Wednesday, the one that I was surprised didn't move, because they'd had such a traumatic experience that seemingly wouldn't go away, with all the report into Justice Taylor report into Hillsborough and all the controversy for decades that has followed. I thought Sheffield Wednesday might say, we could do with a stadium move. Now, maybe it's finances, that is the main reason they haven't. It is an amazing atmosphere. I won't go into it now. I love going there. So that's not what I'm criticizing or suggesting. I think I've kind of answered your point without being able to draw in every example. Generally, I'm pleased that football has moved forward. I was there in the 90s when all this money was being put in. That's how I got my ticket to ride. I'll just say this. People say, well, why has he managed to do what he does, this photographer? I was always out to be the guy who just wanted to photograph football how I thought it was. But to finance it, I was partly funded by the Football Trust and then the Football Foundation, whose sole role, was to put money into the regeneration of all the clubs, big or small, and in Scotland. And they needed a photographer, and I put up my hand and said, well, me, you haven't built these as concrete edifices that no one will, you built them for people, and I'm the people photographer. And it was a marriage made in heaven for me. So I got to go to all these clubs, and I mentioned Chelsea, the running in with Ken Bates. I managed to go to all the clubs, partly with their ticket, if you like. I'm here because I'm here for the Football Trust and the Football Foundation.
Excellent. Right, we will move on. We're to number 5 now. Who's number 5 in your all-time list?
Okay, so this top 10 is going far too quickly. I wanted to talk forever about each club. We can't do that. Number 5 might surprise people because they seem to be hanging on to Premiership status and could be a yo-yo club, Aston Villa. But this is the perspective of the last few years. The perspective of Aston Villa is that actually they were number 1, even ahead of Sunderland and another club we'll come to. There was 3 clubs that for over half of English football's history were the 3 standout clubs. One of them is Sunderland. We've said about them. Another we'll come to. But the one that was at the top of the pile is Aston Villa. There's a sort of regality about them. Prince William likes them. Yeah. David Cameron likes them or supports them. And they're kind of in the bang centre of the country, in the Midlands, in Birmingham. And the ground you can see from Spaghetti Junction and the motorway you're driving, you think, whoa. And you and I, once again, not the youngsters today because it's all shifted to Wembley, but the semi-finals were probably as exciting day, the FA Cup semi-final you could get in the calendar. Now I'd say the playoffs are, but the semi-finals were just magical, events. 2 of them played usually on the same day, staggered. And Aston Villa was always one of the venues. It's hosted 55 FA Cup semi-finals, maybe even a couple of finals sometime further back in history. So, you know, it's not just about Aston Villa, if you like, the club of whatever fortune. It's kind of Aston Villa as a kind of Wembley of the Midlands, if you like. So it's a great ground, you know, as it is now. We talked about moving or not moving. They managed to keep building it up where it is. They made one big mistake, probably. I think it's a picture you'll probably be able to show here in this cut. It's called Midland Semi-Final Venue. It was actually taken, the balloons that you'll see, the red and blue balloons, are the balloons that actually of Crystal Palace and Liverpool playing in a classic semi-final encounter. So it's not a kind of claret and blue of Aston Villa that day of the team. And it's a beautiful facade. Now, the big mistake they made was, I was told it was a listed building. Simon Inglis, who's an Aston Villa supporter, a ground expert, said to me, well, they can never knock that down because it's listed. And then blow me, Doug Ellis, you know, did so many good things. But he somehow managed to swing the demolition ball at that because he just couldn't see a way of moving the ground forward. So that beautiful facade with all the bricks built from Accrington brick is gone.
Yeah, oh really? It's such a shame as well, isn't it?
One of the most beautiful sights in football, you know, albeit old red brick. Coming to number 4, Aaron just told me to move my camera. I was losing my head in the shot there, which sums me up with football. I'm kind of romantic. I'll never be an academic. One of the points of doing this chart was to show there's a lot of thought behind what I do, but a lot of love and a lot of research. You know, I kind of know my stuff. There's nothing like just going along on match day, which is what I do, without a script. You know, I just let it happen. I see things, I photograph it. That's why you've got fans and all these quirky things. But it's kind of nestled on a layer of author or, you know, authority that I kind of know what I'm on about. Number 4 is Manchester United. So in guessing what the top 10 is, a lot of people think it might be Manchester United who are number 1, partly because they kind of have dominated 25 of the last 30 years, pushing Liverpool and clubs a bit out the way with Alex Ferguson. You know, he's won. I've got to look this up because I wouldn't. He's a fearsome man. I wouldn't want to get this fact wrong, and I don't know off the top of my head. 38 trophies. Unbelievable. When he started off, there's a much, you know, lauded story that he was within a game of being sacked in the early 90s. You just can't imagine that. They wouldn't have won 38 trophies without him. He was, I think, without Matt Busby there some 30 years before, who came at the end of the 50s and started having great success, even through the terrible tragedy at Munich where he lost half the team, you know, and Bobby Charlton was a survivor that lived to tell the tale of both eras, if you like. You know, it was incredible how they rebuilt so quickly to still be successful. Then they had this wobble, you know, we won't say it was because of Tommy Docherty and Franco Fowler and people, but they were struggling around that period of the early 70s. And there was a lot of football hooliganism attached to Manchester United, the club, partly because they were just such a sort of sexy club to follow. So I think lots of fans were from, it's a bit of a joke, but lots of fans were from Manchester, but there was others who wanted to join them, you know, a bit like big George Best tearaways on the street. So they had a quite a fearsome reputation along with some other clubs, you know, like Millwall, if you like, you know, if they're coming to your town, a bit like lock up your daughters and bolt the front door. Alex Ferguson, I'm not really somebody to do this actually, but they invited me to go on tour with them to China and Hong Kong in 2005. Pre-season tour, and you know, I'm always an early riser. I was up to date with the Larks, but in the hotel where we were staying, there was loads of fans already outside the door, Japanese. Did I say Japanese? Sorry, Chinese supporters at like 4 a.m, you know, wanting to catch a glimpse of the heroes. But I was the first in the breakfast hall. I was just having my breakfast. Every table was empty. Alex Ferguson comes in. He could have sat anywhere. He didn't really know me. He kind of knew I was on this tour. And he came and sat, you know, with me. And he didn't want to chat about much. He just read the paper and smiled, and I read my paper and smiled. And I thought, and then Nistelrooy came down eventually to have a little moan about something about, position or something. And Alex just winked at me afterwards. But, a fearsome character, if he wanted to be, talk about hairdryer treatment, and he got the best out of these players. And the final thing I'd like to point out really is that for all the ground changes, and it's the biggest capacity now, Old Trafford in the country, beyond Wembley, is they've had all these sexy players. I mentioned George Best, Beckham. He's not sexy, but Keane, Cantona, great names. But actually, they were and Giggs. They were kind of subsumed, not consumed, within a team ethic. And this is Matt Busby. This is Alex Ferguson. That for all that glamour, it's the team thing that came out on top, and that's really why they are so high in this chart, not as high as some people would think.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people will be very surprised that they sit at number 4. Like you say, great club, great history, but yeah, it's a fantastic list. Now, before we move on to the top 3, we'll just have a little recap. So, at number 10, we've got Sunderland.
Yep.
Number 9, we've got Chelsea. Number 8 is Tottenham.
Yeah.
Number 7 is Newcastle United. Number 6 is Manchester City.
Yeah.
Number 5, Aston Villa. And at number 4, we've got Manchester United. So now...
So a quick tot-up, Aaron, I'm butting in. A quick tot-up of that. We've got 2 northeastern clubs.
Yes.
Sunderland and Newcastle. So far, we've had Chelsea and Tottenham, 2 London clubs.
Yeah.
And we've had the 2 Manchester clubs. The one that, isn't any of those is Aston Villa. So we've still got 3 to come.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on. We've got your top 3 now. So who is number 3?
So, as I said to you in the intro, I'm not going to divulge exactly what the points are accumulated over all these league positions cobbled together to create this chart. But I'll tell you this, the top 3 won't change in the next few years. Whatever happens, it's almost impossible that it will change. So it's there to stay. And you might say, ooh, so in other words, Manchester United would do quite a lot to catch up Everton, who are number 3. So Everton probably would have slipped a bit in this, but they came back strong in the sort of 80s and 90s, really. But they were there at football's start. They were one of the founding 12 clubs of the Football League in 1888, older than Liverpool. Liverpool had to play catch up. And, I think that I've rattled on earlier in this top 10 about commemorating a ground. Now, they are due to leave Goodison Park. I believe Goodison Park has got the most intimidating atmosphere of any. So intimidating good, encouraging, intimidating bad. I think if I was a player for the opposition, I would melt. You're only a few yards from a load of scousers yelling at you, absolutely everything, they want to. Almost on the pitch, this is the way of British football, which I adore, is that particularly since post-Hillsborough, there's no moats. There's no fences. There's no machine guns. And that sounds ridiculous, but there is in South America. There's no Alsatian dogs, There's just a few coppers who are unarmed, or stewards these days, some of which have been paid 10 quid to stand there and, be a yellow jacket. And there's nothing much to stop the fans running on the pitch. So as a general comment about our game, this is an amazing thing that we think we've got a football hooligan problem, and we did have, but actually people are pretty well behaved. How many football invasions do you get? You get joyous ones at the end of the season. They're actually not meant to be on there on the final day of the season, but how are you going to arrest 30,000 people? Now, Everton, what I'm alluding to is that Goodison is going to go soon. They're going to move down to the docks. And I think it's a great move. We're talking about good moves. I think it's a wonderful move. Spectacular. Still in Liverpool, by the docks, the thing that gave the city its history. They look like they're trying to set out their stall to say, we're a top 5 club, a world club forever more, rather than just, an original club with this amazing ground. But I was discussing this yesterday with an academic, and I didn't think he'd take me seriously, but I think he was beginning to. I said, we should keep Goodison Park, the nation, as a museum. I don't mean a bit of it. I mean the whole thing, because it's a remarkable ground, nestled in with all the streets where many of the crowd, the Everton fans, come from. Some of the Archibald Leach architecture is still there in the main stand. There's a church. There's literally an actual church that pokes its head through in the corner of the ground. And, you know, if you were showing people around from whatever country, Scandinavians, Germans would love to come and see this. They'd love to see it now on match day. But I think as a museum, it'd be an incredible thing to say to people, this is, for a lot of football history, this is kind of what it was like. This is how close the stands were to the pitch, you know. Just imagine. And they could play videos of how it looked and everything. This won't happen. It will become, you know, a giant Sainsbury's or a shopping centre, or maybe houses, but it's a shame. Goodison, to me, possibly my favourite ground.
Yeah. And it's a fantastic club, very family oriented. It does a lot of good work in the community. And it will be a shame to see Goodison go. But that is obviously the development of football. People want facilities. They want to be able to move around. There's the health and safety regulations that are probably making these grounds a little bit more difficult to manage. So yeah, it will definitely be such a shame to see.
One last point then about that, Aaron, that's a good point, is that without this, I mean, we had the Roker at Sunderland, that was worth points over the course of 100 and something years, I'm sure. But without that intimidating atmosphere at Everton at Goodison Park, I wonder if they wouldn't have dropped a few more points every season, you know, without that crowd absolutely on their back, knowing that Liverpool are just down the road, you know, doing their thing, they've got to compete. I think Goodison itself has been worth positions. You know, they never get relegated. I think it's been a major feature. So if they go to a new stadium, it's then all about, well, what they create there, but it's also just about the team on the pitch. So let's see what happens.
Yeah, and I think that's a challenge for the architects and the designers, is to try and recreate the atmosphere that you would get at an old club like Goodison Park and Roker. St James's Park is quite a good example as well. I mean, it's huge now, but there are still parts where you're quite close to the ground, and that's definitely a challenge for these new stadium builds.
Yeah, with St James's Park, I agree, Aaron, that some of it is the best atmosphere you could find, but there's also, which is a huge area, where the away fans are stuck up there. Sometimes you can have 6,000 of them, and you can hardly hear them. You know.
I didn't even know that.
So atmosphere is a wonderful and strange beast.
Okay, we will move on. Number 2. Who is number 2 in your all-time list?
Well, if people are following this, they're thinking, who's left? You know, okay, it's Liverpool, and there's Arsenal, which is number 1, which is number 2. A cliffhanger. I'll keep you waiting.
This is going to be
Liverpool. It's Liverpool at number 2. And by my reckoning, unless Arsenal completely capitulate in the next 5 to 10 years, even 20 years, like get relegated and finish near the bottom season after season of that division, they'll still be number 1. It's not because they're so far ahead, but actually the top 5 are all quite staggered. You know, it's a fair few seasons of change that would change their positions. So, you know, you're not going to want me back to do this next year or the year after, because it would be much the same. I think in 10 years' time, you might say, Stuart, come back. We've got your head. Come and do your top 10 now. It's changed. At the moment, and for the next few years, Liverpool are number 2. They, as we already mentioned, they're a bit slower off the starting blocks than, say, Everton and many other big clubs, Aston Villa, etc. But boy, have they kind of made up for it up until 1990, when they last won the English champion title. They've never won the Premier League. I wouldn't say they just dominated, because there was Arsenal having a good go of it, and Everton and Villa didn't do so bad. They won a trophy or 2 in that time. But, you know, for that 60s, 70s, 80s, it was Liverpool. So they are number 2, and I can't see it changing.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on them, Aaron?
What do you think about Anfield and what the club have done to Anfield to build it out? They've obviously, like we've been talking about, clubs moving, clubs building on their spot. The main stand at Liverpool, it's transformed the club commercially, and how do you feel it's changed the club from a fan's point of view?
It was always interesting because in 1990 and then all through the 90s into the 2000s, I think it was a bit like Liverpool can only go so far with the Anfield project. You know, it's always going to have to be about how passionate they can sing, You'll Never Walk Alone, how brilliant their teams can be. It felt like the streets around them, and it's a much heralded story how there were some nuns who owned a house right next to it, which inhibited some of the growth there and other houses. In the end, without, I think, being brutal, Liverpool gradually built, paid people a pretty penny to buy their houses off them, and as sad as it sounds, knock them down, because they had to expand for lots of reasons: car parking, access, safety, and a big stand. They've got to a wonderful position now. I mean, they still say, well, we're capacity-wise, we're still some way off Old Trafford, Manchester United. And if Everton build anew, it will be bigger from the start than Anfield. So there's a kind of catching up on and off the pitch being going on there. I hope, you managed to show it in some of the photos, is this kind of cute little corner that people, even some of the Liverpool fans, are a bit kind of quizzed, like, where's that? Have you made that up? There's this homemade champions banner hanging over this little balcony. It's actually just off to the side of where the Kop is, if you like, in its current form. And it always intrigued me. It was like this little gallery of people. You get about 100 people there. And I almost pinched myself and thought, are they really there, or are they kind of ghosts? So hopefully we'll be able to show that photo. So the bugle player is just about to arrive to herald in number 1, which is Arsenal. Where I am today, which is where I grew up, is just north of London. It's not where I've lived for a lot of my life. That's the Lake District, and I'm currently in Lincolnshire, but let's just park my personal story. But all I say is, around these parts, North London, the home counties, the commuter belt to London, quite a lot of Tottenham fans, but I would say Arsenal fans dominate. Watford in Hertfordshire are making a bit of a comeback. Troy Deeney fans, etc. Arsenal are kind of the classic club. I mentioned regality and royalty of Aston Villa in the Midlands. Arsenal are that club, few would disagree, of London. There's a kind of evenness about, they've always been there. Their big growth spurt, particularly, they were doing pretty well, but then they were struggling a little bit one season when Herbert Chapman arrived from Huddersfield Town. He was a Yorkshire man. He'd built quite even in those days, a club that was sort of beginning to be unfashionable, Huddersfield Town. He turned them into the top team of the country for 3 years, and then decided that the lure of London or whatever was too great, and he went south to Highbury. And he didn't just build a team; he did everything. I mean, he really would be. His life was cut short. I'm not sure what age he was, but he died in 1934, I think it was, when Arsenal went on still to win more titles and trophies, etc. But he'd already won them like 3 times. So he went from Huddersfield 3 times to Arsenal 3 times, etc. And there was no stopping them or him. And, to be honest, they've been there ever since. Not quite necessarily number 1 every season, but they don't just swap managers. Arsene Wenger, they didn't want to sack him. They couldn't sack him. I don't know how it worked, but Wenger was there for about 1,000 years, until he moved on. So they have this continuity about them. They are a stylish club. It sounds like I'm a supporter. I am, in a way.
Yeah, and the move from Highbury to the Emirates, how's that affected the club from an atmosphere perspective?
It's been a brilliant move. I mean, not everyone's keen on. I'm not banging the jingoistic provincial drum here, but not everyone is keen on, in Manchester City's and Arsenal's case, Etihad and Emirates being, it's not British Airways or something. It's a sort of a world brand coming in and dominating. People call those two clubs or grounds the Emirates and the Etihad, etc. So, but put that aside, what they built is an amazing stadium that is just within walking distance of Highbury. And they've managed to retain, like we were talking about what you should do when Everton move, and what a shame Roker Park wasn't remembered. They did kind of keep quite a lot of Highbury. Okay, luxury flats, it costs a pretty penny to live there, but maybe that's right, because it's saying what an amazing place this was. There's a park. You can walk in, you're kind of on the pitch as was, and some of the old facades. So remembering all those years at Highbury, the magnificent Highbury, has been done. Fans often going to the new ground, just over the railway track and beyond, have to walk past the old Highbury, or they make a beeline for it, go in some of the same cafes that they used to. I think it's an absolute glorious move. What they'll all say is, yeah, we haven't won the title for quite a while now, and we're not even getting close. And we've just been thumped the other day by the heirs apparent, Manchester City. But classic is kind of the word I want to use every time I think of Arsenal.
Yeah. Okay, Stuart, that was a fantastic little rundown. We've got the top 10. How can people see the definitive list? Where can you go to find the definitive list?
You've got to move to America. The thing is, Aaron, really why I did it was I'd done 2 versions of this book called The Game. It's actually the same cover, so some people are going to get confused because there was nothing wrong with it. John Williams, Professor John Williams, the guy who I bounced a lot of this off, he's an academic. We came up with 20 chapters that define the game, if you like, where it came from, what made British football so special. And then this bevy of all my pictures, some of which you're going to show here. So that's much like I did the first 11 books, but I said, no, I want to show more than that. And so how an American version came around was the first 2, haven't exactly flown off the shelves in Waterstones or somewhere. It doesn't necessarily happen like that now in publishing. I think it's been quite successful, The Game, but we love it so much, we wanted to keep it going. So when an American publishing company came in and said, well, there's a great fascination for your game here, and actually you're getting quite interested in us, what we're doing in America. And I said, yeah, me personally, I've never been the slightest bit interested in the MLS or, soccer in America, because I always thought, why? Well, I've got everything in Britain. But, to just round off your question with an answer, the simple thing is, I did this 133 club rundown with the top 50 highlighted, and we've highlighted 10 for the book for America, which isn't out until the end of July. But don't worry, I'm going to try and make some more feature about this great chart in this country, and not just keep it under wraps for Americans to tell us how we've done over 133 years.
Excellent. Okay. Well, thank you, Stuart. And I hope everything goes well in the future. We can get back into those stadiums, back to photographing big crowds and just enjoying football the way we used to.